Combot Collective is back after a small hiatus, and looks like we're playing a little bit more catch-up here once again. We switched over to Adobe Premiere Pro for our editing software, and while it's exciting, videos are going to look better. We had a couple of hiccups along the way, a couple of speed bumps. We're back right now talking about episodes 6 and 7 of the 2023-2022 Battlebots World Championship 7th season. Quickly, in a lightning round episode, breaking down fights such as the insane upset of RIPperoni versus Endgame, and the main event, such as the intense Minotaur versus Cobalt main event, which happened last week. And of course, Tangent versus Hydra 2, perhaps one of the most hyped up Battlebots main events we have ever had. We're talking about all that and more right here, right now on this unique episode of the Combot Collective. Stay tuned.
Oh my God! Wow! This is the biggest flame we've ever seen.
Has preserved enough energy to get in the flip on Carbine. We're going to go all the way.
Oh my God! That's gonna hurt! Grab the milk, Jenny!
Welcome to the Combot Collective.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another Battlebots Rundown episode here at the Combot Collective. Bring everything you want to know about the 2023 Battlebots World Championship 7th season. I am your host, as always, Sterling Brown, aka Corey the 300th, former writer at Third Law Sports, current Battlebots subreddit moderator, and here to break down these 14 fights from the past 2 weeks. Like I said at the top of the episode, we have switched over to Adobe Premiere Pro, and if you checked out our most recent TCC news episode, the Destructathon one, you can kind of see the changes with Premiere Pro in hand first place. It looks good in my opinion. The transition seems smoother, the graphics seem clear. Maybe it's placebo, I don't know, but it is very exciting. But we won't waste too much time here because, like I said at the top of the video, 14 fights to break down because we're playing a bit of catch up, 2 episodes to do follow up on, but that means 2 main events, 2 exciting opening bouts, 2 midway majors. We're doing double stuff for everything here, but here we go. As always, the Combot Collective is sponsored by our friends at robotsroomlife.com. You can check out their link right here, right now in the description while you're listening to this video. These guys are the merchandise provider for numerous Battlebots and NHRL live scene teams. You know, Battlebots such as RIPperoni, who we're going to be talking about in this video, Shredder Bro, Starchild, another robot we are going to be discussing in this video, but also NHRL robots who we're going to be seeing next month during the March NHRL event. Machines such as Blackbird, the 3-pound Shredder Bro, and Starchild, the Clusterbot, Wake and Bake. All these machines will appear and are on the robotsroomlife.com website shop. So be sure to check them out for t-shirts, buttons, poker chips, prints, all the things I talk about in these TCC videos. You get the gist by now. Link in the description below. Check it out. But now, let's not waste too much time. I keep saying it. 14 fights to talk about. Let's dive in. So here we go. First fight of 14 to talk about here, and it is the big upset of these 14 fights. Of course, we're talking about New Zealand versus New Hampshire, RIPperoni versus Endgame, and the big topic to talk about when we talk about this fight right here is the fork setup for both of these robots. 6 literal forks on RIPperoni, while Endgame would bring back the forks they used versus Hydra in the episode 1 2021 main event. They were goofy then, and they were certainly goofy now here, as Endgame would attempt a box rush on RIPperoni, a rare box rush for Endgame, and immediately go right into the kill saw slots, leaving it prone for a handful of RIPperoni strikes, and Endgame just wouldn't be the same after this. They would deliver some offense, but would immediately, or at least I should say, soon enough, would succumb to the damages from RIPperoni bending its frame beyond repair, as RIPperoni would win a shock knockout here against the former champion Endgame in 1 minute 36 seconds. And with this fight, as exciting as it was, I'm super happy for my sponsors, Robots Room My Life and Omega Team, pulling it off here. I hope to God this means that OES Robotics has learned their lesson about using these goofy long forks. No matter what extra attachments they add to it, they're just a bit more of a gimmick than they are a proper concept here. But, you know, we'll just have to see what they do in the future. The RIPperoni team had issues in their last fight. No issues here, according to team captain Anna Zolnikov. Not Anna Zelinsky, like what Chris Rose said in that last episode, episode 7. The counter flywheel worked perfectly. The main weapon worked perfectly. Bit damage to the wheel during the fight. It's all good. RIPperoni likely only needs one regular season win to move forward here, while Endgame, meanwhile, still on the road to be a playoff top seed. They can still go 3-1 with the schedule they have. But moving forward here, Death Roll versus Switchback, Australia versus Texas, battle of the versions of the Wild West. Really interesting things to talk about this fight. Question marks for both these robots. Kenny Florian specifically was questioning the design of how Switchback was built for this season. I question it too, along with that weapon reliability. But the real questions here for Death Roll, the robot has been built for the 2020 Battlebots season pre-COVID. No modifications since, and this sport evolves quickly. A lot of questions arose about this Death Roll being potentially outdated after the round 1 Cobalt fight, but it looks like they were answered here. Death Roll seemed fine, as in this matchup, you know, Switchback looked strong early on, got the better of the first 2 collisions in the fight. But Switchback's big issue and its catalyst to lose here was the fact that that vertical spinner spin-up time is atrocious on that egg beater weapon, unfortunately. Wouldn't spin up quickly at all, and that allowed Death Roll to get numerous openings to strike. And they did big time damage to Switchback here, especially on the front wedges on the weapon, eventually knocking the Texas robot out in 1 minute 44 seconds. Really good to see that Death Roll is still a competitor, a contender, a robot which can likely still get into the playoffs, given it only has to face Monsoon and Mammoth to get there. I think that Death Roll should be able to beat these 2 robots unless Monsoon uses that wedge attachment, which we'll talk about later in the video. We'll see how it goes, but for Switchback, the sole Texas representative, I really want to see these guys do good and make the playoffs. They almost made it last year, but came just short. Ominous and hijinks left for them. It's doable. We'll just have to see how it goes. Briskly spinning forward, and this one will be a lot quicker than this fight, that's for sure. It was a horizontal spinner battle on paper. It seemed really exciting. Shredderator versus Hijinks, and before the fight, Kenny Florian would say that this might be Brian Nave's last season. I haven't heard anything about this on any social media or Reddit or Discord or anywhere before this. This was news to me. I hope that's not the case, but Christ almighty, this was a bit of a bummer fight. Shredderator would spin up to full speed almost and do exactly what Gigabyte did around 1 versus free shipping. Drive directly into a wall. A great start. This would hinder Captain Shredderator's weapon for quite some time, as Hijinks meanwhile would manage 1 quality strike to Captain Shredderator before it also would lose its weapon power for the remainder of the fight. Well, I say it also. Captain Shredderator's weapon would come back later in the fight around the 1 minute 30 second mark, land a couple strikes to Hijinks and kill the Undercutter in 2 minutes 22 seconds. I guess you can call it a comeback KO. Really awkward fight. I compared Shreddit versus Horizon to MR Speed Squared versus Foxic, but really, this is the comparison right here. Another fight that likely wouldn't have made TV if all fights weren't making TV this year. Hijinks overall spent 16 seconds of this fight spinning up to full speed, while Shredderator would beat it with just over 30 seconds spin at full speed in what was almost a 3-minute matchup. Bit of an abysmal performance for both of these guys, and it's really a bummer because both Brian Nave and Orion Beach are absolutely fantastic drivers, some of the most underrated in the sport. Go back to, you know, Shredderator in the RFL days, Electric Boogaloo in the Robo Games days. Both these guys are both great, but Kenny Florian put it best here. Both these robots feel more like 0-2s than 1-1s right now. We'll have to see how it goes in the future. Both these machines have a massive hill to climb if they want to make the top 32. But now on to the episode 6 Midway Major. One of 2 rematches in this episode from past playoff tournaments, and this one's from the round of 32 in the 2020 Battlebots playoffs. Back at that time, it was Jackpot, the undefeated rookie, taking on Rotator, who was in the playoffs at 1-2. Rotator would win that match and have a decent playoff run, but now we're running it back. A lot has changed with Jackpot since this matchup, but both these robots had a very disappointing round 1. Reception issues for Rotator against Hydra. Overall issues period for Jackpot against Scorpius. They needed a big time bounce back in this fight. Some interesting configurations used here for Jackpot. Worth noting here, it came in with a Twin Peak setup using that Heartbreaker blade, which weighs 52 pounds, plus a pair of wide anti-horizontal spinner plow wedges at the front, which are designed specifically for undercutters, though I felt like those wide wedges really felt more like bait for undercutters. I mean, they're so easy to take out, and that's exactly what Rotator would do early on in this fight. After a few strikes to Jackpot, it would rip off one of these wide Twin Peaks wedges on Jackpot. More plows than wedges, I should say. And from that point, Rotator targeted that bare right side on Jackpot, did a lot of damage, and eventually killed the once undefeated in regular season machine Jackpot in 2 minutes 49 seconds. Really disappointing to see this robot enter this season. Like I said, with a reputation of being 5-0 in the regular seasons past. Now 0-2 in their first 4-round regular season here in 2022, 2023, World Championship 7, whatever you want to call it. So it's really disappointing for the home team. Rotator, though, they have to feel rejuvenated. The robot has a new radio receiver. It works great. A lot of new pit crew members showed up for the team, so it's really all hands on deck for the second half of the season. And they're going to be taking on some big names like Bloodsport and Fusion, Rotator versus Blue Fusion, and round 4, one of my most anticipated fights in the regular season. That's going to be utterly insane with how Fusion is performing this year. Moving briskly on forward, battle of two West Coast machines, California versus Washington, and this is really a potential preview of RoboGames 2023. We'll have a video, our final update video on RoboGames 2023 out later in the month. But for now, we're talking about two robots which will be at this tournament under different aliases. Scorpius looking as it usually does, but Big Deal finally debuting the vertical spinner and lifter setup. It's been hyping up all off season using that 25-pound chicken head asymmetrical blade. No hammer saws here, no lifters here, no plows. We're finally getting to see it, and it looked fantastic here as Big Deal was better in this fight's first half, mostly capitalizing on the sloppy, uncharacteristically I should say, sloppy driving from Scorpius, while managing a couple significant vertical spinner strikes and lift, flipping Scorpius over a few times. But unfortunately, control would end abruptly for Big Deal, as I would say around midway through the fight, it would drive directly into the blue square screws, somehow simultaneously damaging both the weapon and drive, dead in the water, as 3 of the 4 Scorpius strikes it would manage in this fight would come after Big Deal was already a sitting dead in the water target. As I said, not a very impressive performance here for Zach Lytle, but still a victory. A questionable one, that knockout in 1 minute 26 seconds. Zach Lytle really needs to, get a bit more steady on the sticks for the second half of the season, where they're going to be facing Sawblaze and Ribeye, big-time main event level competitors. Scorpius versus Sawblaze is going to be a huge fight, but I've heard the rumors. I've heard what Zach Lytle said on another podcast. It's going to be the overkill blade used in this Sawblaze fight. We're going to have to see how that goes. Meanwhile, Big Deal looked great, but they seriously need to work on that reliability. This fight would have been won if they managed to go the full 3 minutes with the working robot. It's a real bummer, but we're going to have to see how they do in the second half of the season at 0-2. They're going to need to win both of their fights, including that round 3 matchup of that Western Allied Robotics Civil War against Mad Catter. We'll just have to see how it goes for them. And now in Fight 6 of Episode 6, it was Banshee versus Valkyrie, a battle of mythology, but also a battle of some history here, a rematch of sorts. David Small's son of Cram and Lucy Doo's Hot Leaf Juice met during the 2021 July NHRL Hobbyweight event, and in this match, Lucy Doo's Hot Leaf Juice would take the W by knockout here, so revenge was certainly on the mind for David Small, and this match was also a battle of attachments, worth noting here. Banshee would enter this matchup using the anti-horizontal wedge we brought up in the preview, a wedge apparently labeled the big green thing, while Valkyrie, interestingly enough, would use their 3-tooth blade glory. But the fascinating thing here, along with that, a brand new jousting arm fork, wedgelet, whatever you want to call it, on the front of Valkyrie, hoping to help with their ground game against a flipper such as Banshee. Really didn't work well. Banshee had 2 flips in 7 attempts. Not the most impressive, but these 2 flips were seriously significant. One throwing Valkyrie forward and the other one flipping it over and keeping Valkyrie upside down for the remainder of the fight. As eventually Banshee, after so many rams, would manage to force Valkyrie to rip off its own jousting fork with that glory blade, feeding it right into the weapon there. Banshee, though, latter half of the fight had some serious drive issues and almost knocked itself out, looking like a crappy Target shopping cart that, could only veer one way for the second half of this fight. And that forced a split judge's decision because of the lack of mobility here. I've heard a lot of people questioning why Lisa Winters would go for Valkyrie in this fight. Well, simple enough. A lot of the fight was edited out for TV purposes, and a lot of the fight edited out was Banshee just saying they're doing nothing. That gave Lisa Winter her choice in this matchup, and it makes sense when you think of it like that, but still, I believe the right robot won here in Banshee. 2 flips, but 2 very impressive flips at that. They're 1-1 at the halfway point of the regular season. If they wanted to beat the likes of Emulsifier and Blip, they got to seriously work on their drive reliability. The flipper works great. It seems to survive through thick and thin, hell or high water so far. It's been very impressive, but the drive's got to get better. David Small is absolutely based. I love the war accent. I love the kilt. He's absolutely sick. Valkyrie, meanwhile, big-time issues. They really got to work it out. Mal's and Glitch up next for them. They should be able to win if those robots have issues. We'll just have to see how it goes. But now let's talk about this main event. In this main event here, of course, Hydra versus Tantrum. Perhaps one of the most hyped up main events in Battlebots history, I would say. The production team did utterly fantastic on these 3 hype up videos in build up for this matchup. Utterly amazing stuff. Of course, like I said, this was the second rematch of episode 6 here. As we all know, during the 2021 semifinals last year, incredibly controversial matchup between Tantrum and Hydra, which split the community, myself included. I thought Hydra won that matchup, but there was no controversy here. It was all straightforward. Tantrum would immediately own the ground game and keep it for pretty much the entire fight outside that one Hydra flip. And speaking of Hydra, 1 for 2 on flip attempts. That only flip was decent, but not enough to keep Tantrum at bay, as Tantrum delivers 8 strikes. Looked much more dominant than it did last year in terms of ground control, ripping apart Hydra's underbelly and eventually high centering it for a knockout at 1 minute and 4 seconds, doing it the same way it high centered Witch Doctor during the 2021 Battlebots Giant Nut Finals. Bit of a callback, said, look, I did it to Witch Doctor, I can do it to you. Seems Reasonable Robotics needed this win big time after Blip went 0-2. Tantrum entered this at 0-1. They needed this, even though they are defending champions. They're still underrated, and they impressed here big time. Hydra only managed 1 flip to its 11 it performed against Tantrum in 2021, while Tantrum would land 8 to its 5 punches it had in that prior fight. They certainly shut the Waiachi heads and the Tantrum doubters down, all those Tantrum fans that said Tantrum had a Mickey Mouse championship, some of them here at the Combot Collective. They really shut them up here in this dominant victory. Now both these robots are 1-1 at the half. Tantrum might have to cannibalize Blip, its own teammate, if they want to move forward into the playoffs, while on Hydra's end has to get a victory against Free Shipping or Sawblaze. If it beats both, maybe consider it for a top 3 seed. We'll have to see how it goes. So that's 7 fights up, and that's usually where we're done, but take your breather, take a drink, take a bite to eat, because we got 7 more fights as we now jump into episode 7, our most recent episode. And here is a bit more of a proper horizontal spinner versus horizontal spinner fight to kick off this one. It is Bloodsport versus Gigabyte, as we have an episode bookended by the Robotic Death Company here. They're starting off the episode and they're in a main event. And this is a big one here, as the loser was probably going to be out of the playoff push. Both Gigabyte and Bloodsport looked embarrassing in their round 1 knockout defeats against Free Shipping and Copperhead respectively. Really needed a big win here, as Bloodsport would bust out the 62-pound Wheel of Misfortune, originally named the Ferris Wheel here for this fight. And also they busted out an anti-horizontal spinner beak, something kind of like Bolter Beast from Robotica, if you remember that machine. Now it looked like we were seeing some promise from Gigabyte early on, with a few significant strikes to key spots of Bloodsport, throwing it all over the arena. But durability would be the key point in this matchup, as a massive strike that was right in the middle of this matchup threw both robots apart. It's the biggest part of the fight. I'm sure you all remember it well. And with this big collision, all systems on Bloodsport were still working perfectly fine. Drive was moving well, the weapon perfectly spinning. Gigabyte, meanwhile, dead in the corner corral. So overall, 2 minutes and 22 seconds knockout here for Bloodsport. A big time, much needed victory for the revised Bloodsport design. And we really saw some fantastic weapon control here by Bloodsport. Seems like Aaron Lucas is now back controlling that deadly spinning weapon on Bloodsport, with Retrograde gone this season. And speaking of BNS team members, shoutouts to Texas' own Pearl Gray with the Bloodsport briefcase in the background, laptop inside. Glad to see some of the home state infiltrate the BNS robotics ranks. Bloodsport looked excellent here, but Gigabyte up to Schitt's Creek here at 0-2. This new regime is just not it. But with the recent AMA on the Battlebots subreddit, we have confirmation that both Gigabyte and Brent Riker will be back for World Championship 8. So there's still some hope for all y'all Gigabyte fans out there. And fight 2 in episode 7 will be a judo battle of the grapplers, and a battle of the shock undefeated machine so far, with Claw Viper 2-0 after victories against Ominous and Robot, while Overhaul 1-0 after defeating Starchild in a interesting judge's decision. As we see here, Claw Viper is so fast, it's having its round 3 matchup way before anyone else. I find that quite interesting. And we also have both these robots unchanged here from their previous victories against Robot and Starchild respectively. But one thing here before we talk about the details of the fight, I must make a correction. I've been saying all season, the season prior, and in our preview, that this clamp on Claw Viper is UHMW. I'm sorry, it is metal. I thought it was metal. I was actually correct there at first. No, it's actually UHMW, so that's my bad. My mistake here. But yes, this was an action-packed fight here. Blink and you miss it kind of action. Claw Viper and Overhaul look like two angry stag beetles, two rams just absolutely at war here, shoving and lifting themselves all over the arena. Overhaul would be 3 for 6 in clamping lift attempts, managing 1 flip on Claw Viper, while Claw Viper not as accurate, more aggressive here, 6 for 13 on lift attempts with a few flips and even 1 big time suplex in the final 10 seconds of the fight, which may have decided this one here. You know, it seemed like it was all Claw Viper at first in the opening 2 minutes, but we did see some drive issues on Claw Viper in that final 60-second span, which allowed Overhaul some big time offense, but not enough. As I said, unanimous judge's decision victory here for Claw Viper. And man, I just love the variety in architecture and styles of driving we saw in both of these robots, Claw Viper and Overhaul, which, as you look at them, very similar styles, clamping design, built for suplexes. But we got Overhaul, who's, you know, all-terrain, big wheels, crushing clamp. And then you got the sleek, low ground clearance, smaller wheels, Claw Viper, who's much quicker, but not as lethal of a clamp, not really as much of a crusher as Overhaul's is, but still, Claw Viper victorious here. And who would have thought at the start of the season we'd be saying that Claw Viper of all robots would be the first to book themselves into the top 32, but they pretty much guaranteed it here, 3-0 to start their season. Well deserved. And Overhaul, meanwhile, also very impressive in defeat. A valiant showing versus Cobalt and a win over Shreddit may get them into the top 32 as a bottom 5 seed. Keep an eye on Overhaul during the second half of the season. But now let's move on to a revolutionary battle. US versus UK, Monsoon versus Horizon. And the big topic entering this fight was Monsoon entering with a never before seen anti-horizontal spinner wedge attachment. Personally, I felt like this was a bit overkill for a robot like Horizon, but thanks to a direct response from Tom Brewster himself, we heard from him that the team wanted to play it safe after a 0-1 start against Black Dragon, and quite frankly, the team just wanted to use this thing after 2 years of keeping this attachment secret. And boy, did they not waste time using it. Monsoon would kick this fight off with a massive box rush, delivering a big time strike to Horizon's front within 2 seconds from point A to point B right here. And then 7 more vicious Monsoon strikes later, we were looking at Horizon propped up on its head, wedged onto the arena wall in the pulverizer with only one of its 2 blades spinning. Quick knockout, only 51 seconds from point A to point B here for Monsoon. One of the fastest fights this year, not the fastest. I believe Bloodsport versus Copperhead still the winner in that regard, but still less than a minute here for Monsoon. This was the big win they needed after a bit of an embarrassing loss against Black Dragon. Just to show you how big of a win this was and how destructive of a win this was for Monsoon, let's look at the reports from Horizon's social media here on what all was broken in this fight. We have a broken weapon frame. That whole weapon bar on Horizon completely busted thanks to Monsoon. The Shreemech Taco, which helped big time in that matchup against Shreddit, was busted beyond use. The team had to haphazardly build a new one for round 3. The base plate on Horizon clearly penetrated with a massive gash, which left one side of the drive frame split on Horizon. But, get this, somehow, some way, the ESC, the batteries, the wheels, all internals on Horizon was fine. So I guess the armor did what it needed to do. If Horizon somehow landed on its wheels, it would have continued on fighting here. But it's a shame. Horizon, probably one of the most unique robots this year, has not performed at all. If I had to rank all 50 robots in the first half of this season, I might have Horizon sitting at number 50 out of 50, and I know various other TCC members agree with this statement. The wedge on Monsoon, meanwhile, looked absolutely vicious here, and it worked vicious as well. I'm glad to see Tom Brewster so emotional after this victory. The second half of the season will be a challenge, but not impossible for the UK team here. We'll have to see what happens. Midway major time with Starchild versus Mammoth. People love these big robot fights, but I anticipated this one not being as exciting as the huge fight in 2020. I was correct about it. Still a pretty good fight. This was a meeting of 0-1s that were in need of a win in hopes of keeping their season, relatively safe entering the second half. Mammoth collapsed on itself versus Valkyrie, while Starchild had some first-time struggles against Overhaul. Kind of awkward inside the arena. No major changes to each robot visually, but Mammoth would have extra armor placed on top of the robot in preparation for overhead strikes from Starchild. Kicking off this fight, Starchild looked strong at first with a decent strike to the side of Mammoth and a wild flick which threw Mammoth onto its side, but afterwards Mammoth would keep Starchild's weapon at bay and took pretty much full control of the fight, even managing a chokehold of sorts just a minute into the matchup, as Mammoth held Starchild about 2 feet up into the air, drove it around. It was incredibly impressive, and apparently this needed an unstick. You can kind of tell by the editing, and it was confirmed on the Battlebots subreddit. Just showed how tangled up these two UHMW monsters were. Overall, Mammoth would be much more dominant and aggressive here, getting more control as well, and that would be enough to secure a unanimous JD victory here for the Maryland team. This was a much needed win for Mammoth, and with 2 vertical spinners on deck, it's still going to be a tough road to the playoffs, but hey, Mammoth well on its way to at least doing better than it did last year. Only 1 victory and 5 losses. That was tough. On Starchild's side though, hate to see my boys at Omega Team struggle here with this robot. The driving ability seems to be there for Brandon Zielinski, but the weapon reach has not. Teammate Anna Zolnikov though would say in commentary that Starchild was built for other vertical spinner robots, not these odd designs it has fought thus far, so perhaps in the second half of the season, hopefully we'll see some better performances here by Starchild. I certainly want to see them. But now here we go. The Navy Divers taking on the Snake. It is Triton versus Copperhead, a battle between 2 teams which have been quite active in the 30-pound world during 2022, but the 2 never managed to meet inside the arena at any point during last year. A contrast of round 1s though for these 2 robots. Copperhead was dominant in its first round, a one-hit KO victory against Bloodsport, while Triton struggled against the Canadian Lucky, being on the receiving end of a few flips of that matchup, ultimately being left on its side for a knockout defeat. So Triton a little bit shaky coming into this fight, but Copperhead, even despite this victory, also coming in a little bit shaky with its own issues. That frame was seriously bent in round 1, so there's some issues to be resolved here entering this fight. And speaking of this fight, there will be a snake on the feeder wedge of Copperhead for this matchup, and this sacrifice of the snake would be pretty much the only damage Copperhead would take during this rather quick fight, as Copperhead would eat 3 Triton strikes from that deadly horizontal spinner 80-pound anchor blade early on, and then a driving error by Bradley Handstead would leave Triton's rear open, so Copperhead could deliver a perfect strike to the rear of the horizontal spinner, absolutely gutting the hometown robot Triton here, as batteries and ESCs would literally explode from the bot's back half like a piñata. But with Triton's dying motion, it managed to shove one of these batteries under Copperhead, leading to a double knockout judge's decision, which, as cool as it was, obviously would go to Copperhead here. But, Jesus Christ, perhaps one of the most guttural and brutal knockouts of the season. No, I would say the most brutal and guttural knockout of the first half of the regular season here. This is going to be one that we are most definitely going to be remembering. But I am shocked to see that Triton's armor is so flimsy, split like nothing against the deadly spinner, and I am bummed out for Bradley Handstead, but these crazy Team Overboard creations usually take at least a year or so to make perfect. High hopes for their second half, but Copperhead, meanwhile, well on the road to potentially a 4-0 season. A series of questionable one-on-ones left for its second half in Hijinks and RIPperoni. We'll have to see what they do, but also, shout-outs to Clive Magnuson for once again somehow making it through another round shenanigan-free. Copperhead, Luke, you guys still better keep an eye on that guy, though. And now, on to Fight 6 in Episode 7, a rematch from the 2019 Battlebots World Championship Exhibitions, a fight between Lucky and Kraken, and in that 2019 fight, Lucky would win in an underwhelming judge's decision, but with Kraken now fully rebuilt into a hammer saw, and Lucky, now with Matt Olson behind the wheel, This may as well be a clean slate between two brand new robots. All that side armor that we saw on Lucky in round 1 had been moved to the top in preparation for Kraken's hammer saw, but I do question how steep their punching flipper was for this fight, despite its success here. Big time success as we would get to, as Kraken pretty much was dead before it all even started. It pulled a grab bot as right as this fight began, half of its drive on the right side was already dead. And this dilemma left Lucky a Kraken-sized flipping toy to make use of. Lucky would deliver the sea monster a near perfect 13 flips in 15 attempts, as these flips would tear apart the treads of Kraken's tires, and it even managed to bust the weapon belt on Kraken's blade. But all this effort, all this shoving and bullying from Lucky would force itself to bust out a little bit of smoke on its own, kill its own right drive within the final 10 seconds of the matchup. That struggle at the end obviously did not affect the fight too much. A unanimous judges decision victory here for Lucky, but the smoke and drive issues at the end did give me shades of the old 2018-2019 Lucky. Better to have these issues late than early though. They still managed to pick up a big time win here, and this contender era of Lucky has been a sight to see. Lucky is now 2-0 at the season's half with Shredded and Combot on deck. If all things go right, we could potentially see Lucky as a top 10 seed maybe? Who would have thought we'd be saying that in 2021? But what on earth was up with the guy in the Pharaoh hat on Team Lucky? That old dude just rocking the Pharaoh hat in the background. That was some crazy shit. But now let's get on to our main event here. It was Minotaur versus Cobalt, of course, another rematch here from 2019, but this one from a top 24 meeting. And if you remember that fight, it was a Minotaur W by judge's decision. And at one point in that fight, incredible moment in Battlebots history when Minotaur sent Cobalt flying so high, cameras did not capture how high Cobalt went. In fact, we still don't have camera footage on how high Cobalt went during that fight. It remains elusive, it remains a lost footage. Trey Roski, Greg Munson, please post that footage. But I digress. This would be a meeting between two of the most decorated UK and Brazilian teams respectively here. Team Carbide is a multi-time FRA UK heavyweight and featherweight champion. Along with that, they are a former Robot Wars champion and a TIFR 2018 champion as well. Riobots from Brazil, meanwhile, a multi-time winner of Brazil's Winter Challenge event in multiple weight classes. Also a 2022 NHRL finalist in multiple weight classes last year. A 2014 STEMTech Olympiad winner, 2015 RoboGames heavyweight winner, and it even managed to recently sweep the gold medals at India's 2022 IIT Tech Fest. So big time history, big time acclaim for both of these teams here. And going back to that 2019 loss, a big catalyst in that matchup was the loss of that feeder wedge early on for Cobalt. So Team Carbide had made a Minotaur specific 4-fork setup for this fight, and early on worked beautifully here as Cobalt would kick this fight off insanely strong. 5 successive unanswered strikes to Minotaur before it would lose its first fork of the matchup of the 4. And, you know, as soon as these forks started coming off one by one, the tide of the fight felt more and more potentially in Minotaur's favor. But despite this pressure, Cobalt managed to vastly outstrike and outcontrol Minotaur for a bold majority of this fight until the 45 seconds remaining mark of the fight came along, as here Minotaur would finally rip off that 4th and final Cobalt fork. And, you know, 2 smoking Minotaur drum strikes later, despite all this bullying, all this dominance, all this control, we would see Minotaur leave Cobalt upended to be knocked out with 6 seconds left. A comeback thriller here. Cobalt down, Minotaur picking up a knockout victory in 2 minutes 54 seconds. And you know, this fight was really a story of suspense in the end. Like I mentioned, it was all about the forks on Cobalt here. The suspense in this fight really made it one of the best fights this entire season, and a lot of fans agree. Everyone was just standing at the edge of their seats, sitting at the edge of their seat, I should say. Geez, I know I was standing watching that final fork and Cobalt just hang on, take strike after strike after strike. I really do feel like that, you know, as soon as all 4 of those forks were gone, we still had, you know, 35 seconds left in the matchup. There was no shame in running for Cobalt and David Molds here. They should have ran. It probably would have gone to the judge's decision if Cobalt managed to survive just 6 more seconds to avoid the count out. That frustrates me, but nonetheless, Cobalt still looked very impressive here with this loss. The tough half of the season is now over. It has Overhaul and Lucky in the second half. They should be fine for the playoffs, And Minotaur, meanwhile, becomes our second robot to be safe for the playoffs at 3-0. And assuming Witch Doctor defeats Gruff, and I think it will, this will mean we will have Witch Doctor versus Minotaur for likely deciding the #1 seed in the 2022 World Championship 7 playoffs. That's going to be insane. It's probably going to be the final fight of the regular season. That's going to be juicy. But now let's get you guys out of here. 14 fights up, 14 fights down this time. I hope we were brisk. I hope this episode doesn't end up being too long in post. But I know I'm certainly tired after covering 14 crazy fights. You know, we saw Robotic Death Company bookend the second episode here. 2 losses for them, very frustrating. Gigabytes not looking good, but Cobalt still very much looking solid. Our main event winners, Tantrum and Minotaur, both looked incredibly impressive. You know, we also had our sponsors, robotsruinmylife.com, with our friends at Omega Team, look amazing with RIPperoni, pulling off the huge upset against Endgame. But Starchild, meanwhile, still having some struggles. Hopefully they have a better second portion of their season. Same with Switchback. I want to see the Texans do well, but I am happy to see Deathroll do good. We can talk all about these robots, but we got to move forward here. The main event for this coming week is Tantrum versus Blip. Seems reasonable civil war. It's going to be exciting. We also have our hammer hoedown between Beta and Shatter. Who's going to be the best overhead weapon in the world? Only time will tell. But let's get you guys out of here. I'm your host, as always, Sterling Brown here at the Combot Collective. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our links are in the description below. Join our Discord channel. That's where all of our video news goes out first. That's also in the description below. And of course, if you like this video, give us a like, leave a comment. It helps with the algorithm. And of course, please, please, please subscribe to the channel if you dig what you're seeing here. Ring the bell icon. Do all that fun stuff. This has been the Combot Collective, and we are now caught up on the regular season of Battlebots with more coming along. Hopefully we'll have a live stream happening soon here. But for now, we'll catch you later.
This was the Combot Collective. Find us on Instagram and Discord.